Chapter 2. Achilles ducked his head down as he pushed his way through the crowd of people. He limped heavily on his leg, but he was getting used to moving around without a crutch. It had been several months since the bones in his ankle had been shattered, and it still ached when he walked. The doctors told him he was lucky that he could walk at all, but he didn't feel lucky. Over the last few months, he'd grown thin, as he'd had to ration his money to feed himself while his bones healed. He wasn't very tall and had a thin, wispy beard of a boy trying to be a man. His light brown hair had grown shaggy, but he didn't bother to cut it. His mother had always been the one to make him wash and dress presentable. A glint of steel flashed, and Achilles cut the coin purse from a man as he continued to push through the crowd. They had gathered at the request of the city's mage. One mage or another had always ruled Silver City. Any time a powerful new mage decided that they wanted to move up in the world, Silver City had erupted in destruction as they battled the current ruler for dominance. Silver City was rich, or at least richer than most of the cities in Chaitan. The silver mines turned out huge profits for the nobility and provided the common folk with steady, high-paying jobs. It was too far from the capital for the Mage Guild to properly police it, so it was largely subject to whoever ruled it at the time. But compared to the capital, it was really an ideal place to live. As long as you don't care if you die in a stupid mage battle, Achilles thought darkly, or at the hands of a pissed-off mage. Their last ruler had been old, or rather older for a mage. Most mages Achilles heard of didn't make it to old age. Their new ruler was horrible and routinely rounded up people he thought weren't loyal enough and had them executed publicly. The worst part was the public spectacle he made out of it. If the citizens didn't make a proper show of harassing the accused by hurling rotten fruit, stones, and insults at them, then more were taken at random. "How long are we going to have to suffer under Silas?" one man grumbled. "Sabras ruled here for near on 13 years before Silas killed him, and at least 24 other mages tried to oust Sabras." Another answered, "The nobles love him. I heard that he's letting them take any women they want, any time they want, just so long as they don't be killing any mine workers. Sam's wife and daughter was taken last week." "No, you're not serious?" another asked. "Yep. Soldiers burst in the middle of the night, broke both Sam's legs. Docs don't think he'll make it. But since he's only a stableman, there ain't even going to be an investigation," he said, shaking his head. "This place ain't going to be pleasant to live in shortly." "It already isn't," Achilles said as he walked past the men. "Isn't that Hector's boy? I thought he was killed," the man asked. "Nah, his luck ain't run dry yet," the man replied. Achilles' face flushed with anger. "Curse Callias's own luck. I want no part of it," he muttered under his breath. Most folk worshipped Callias because they thought that he would return one day and rid the world of mages. Callias had been the first man to kill a mage, or so the legends went. Achilles stopped and tried to peer through the crowd as a cheer rose up. They must be marching out the so-called traitors, Achilles thought. More likely they are enemies or family of enemies of the nobles that held Silas's favor this week. Through the crowd, Achilles caught a glimpse of Silas pounding one of the traitors into the stage that he had built for these gruesome executions. The winds began whipping through the crowd as the mage drew them in, crushing the life out of the poor women who tried to scream as the life was crushed out of her. The winds were so loud that men covered their ears and ducked down. This gave Achilles a glimpse of the stage where he saw 3 children screaming. No one would have known that they were screaming as the winds howled and drowned them out. "A woman and her 3 children are traitors," Achilles said aloud after the winds died down, signaling the woman's inevitable end. Several of the people around him in the crowd eyed him and shifted uncomfortably. "Does it strike anyone as strange that this is Ben's family?" Achilles asked loudly. Keep your damn voice down. You want to get the rest of us killed?" The man next to him muttered. Several others in the crowd murmured their agreement. "Cowards!" Achilles sneered as he began limping back through the crowd. As the howling of the winds died down, he could hear the cries of the children who'd just seen their mother murdered in front of their eyes. A cheer rose up from the crowd as the winds began to pick up again. Achilles limped past the end of the crowd and turned down into the Raff district. He had found a quiet, abandoned hovel to stay in temporarily. Until his ankle got better, he wouldn't be able to hold down any job. An hour or so later, he plopped the sack of coins he'd lifted on the table and began counting them. It didn't bother him that the table wobbled under the slightest touch. The small sack of coins threatened to overturn the worn-out piece of furniture. "Barely enough to eat this week," he said, letting out a sigh. Just then, he heard a familiar sound. Turning, he saw a blur of orange fur swing in through the open window. "Chauncey, where have you been lately?" Achilles scolded. Chauncey was a small capuchin monkey that had swirling orange and brown fur all over his body, except for a bright blue that framed his eyes. The monkey put both hands on his head and began howling and chirping as it hopped around the hovel. Okay, I'm not mad. Here, I brought you something," Achilles said as he pulled a ripe banana from the inner pocket of his coat. Chauncey leapt, grabbing the banana before settling on Achilles' shoulders, slapping the fruit on his head as he screeched in excitement. Hey, calm down and eat your stinking banana, you turd," Achilles said, laughing. He had grown very fond of Chauncey since the incident with his parents. The monkey was the closest thing to family he had now. Shrugging the capuchin off his shoulders, he walked over to a broken chest of drawers and pulled out the top drawer, flipping it over. The whole dresser shifted on its nearly rotten base. Years of exposure to the elements had made the thing unusable, except for hiding one or two little things. The wood smelled musty and thick splinters came off every time Achilles pulled the drawer out. He removed the bundle of papers he'd wedged under it and folded them out onto the shaky table. He went over the plans again, writing down the new information he'd collected that day. The papers held weeks and weeks of dates, times and places, all tracking Silas's movements through the city. Achilles noted several distinct patterns. Silas wasn't exactly careful in Silver City, but he needed an excuse to get close to the mage. He always travelled with an entourage of nobles and bodyguards. It would be incredibly difficult to get close enough to shoot him. Of course, in order to shoot him, I'll have to get myself a gun first, Achilles said, sighing. He folded the plans back up and tucked them in the bottom of the drawer, replacing it in the rickety old dresser. Chauncey heard something outside and screeched as he bounded through the room and out the window, leaping onto a nearby palm tree. Achilles knew that he'd be back that night like he had been every night for the last few weeks. He bent down and rubbed his ankle. It hurt like hell from all the walking he'd been doing lately. "It won't heal right if you don't stay off it," Achilles said in a mock impression of the doctor. He hated doctors. "Who cares anyway?" he mumbled. "Any day now, some mage is going to be in a bad mood, and then, wham," he said, slapping his hand on the table. "I may not be able to make much of a life for myself, but I can make sure he doesn't either." Achilles reached a tentative hand into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled picture. He stared at it for a few minutes, rubbing away the tears that leaked from his eyes. The picture was of his mother. He didn't have one of his father. It was black and white and fraying a little in the left bottom corner. He'd memorized the 3 creases that crossed in diagonal patterns through his mother's dress. She was wearing the silver necklace around her neck that his father had given her. It held an emerald the size of a full crown coin. He had buried it on the outside of town near the graves he'd dug. "Why'd you leave me?" he whispered as he pressed the cool paper against his hot cheek. He sobbed for a while before he tucked the photo back into his coat pocket. He curled up on the dirty blanket he used as a bedroll. His stomach growled, and he couldn't help but think of the necklace. It was worth a small fortune and could feed him for a year. Or buy me a gun, he thought as he felt the hatred bubbled up, making his cheeks flush even redder. Just then, Chauncey plunked down next to Achilles. The small monkey curled up around his neck for warmth. Achilles wiped away another tear and scratched Chauncey's back. The monkey cooed in pleasure as Achilles found his favorite spot. "You always know just when I need you, boy," Achilles said, turning back over. "At least you'll never leave me." "What the hell are you doing, Ramza?" Clint shouted as he dashed over to where Ramza was holding Tristan's head in a barrel of water. "He's been drunk for 6 days. I thought that it was time to sober him up. Plus he needs a bath. My caravan stinks," Ramza said as he lifted Tristan's head out of the barrel of water. "Don't worry, I won't let him drown." "No, I mean we passed a stream a ways back. That's our good drinking water. Or at least it was." Tristan sprayed water out of his mouth, coughing. "Let me go, you gorilla," he shouted as Ramza plunged his head back into the barrel. Clint threw his hands up in the air as he walked back over to his horse. "You better not feed us any of that water," Clint shouted back as Ramza pulled Tristan out of the barrel and let him flop onto the ground. "You overgrown, stinking, ugly son of Ceres." Tristan spat as he tried to stand up and fell back over. "Oh man, I'm sorry, buddy. It was an accident, I swear," Ramza said, chuckling. "Let me help you up." "Don't touch me," Tristan shouted as he got shakily to his feet. "Where's my bottle?" "It's all gone, Trist. We gave it all to you, but we need you to come back to us now," Clint said. "You got like this last time, but he's gone. We're going to catch him, I promise you." "You can all lick Ceres' boots for all I care," he said as he tried to climb back into the caravan before falling back to the ground, the dirt sticking to his wet face. Clint walked over and bent down. He could see tears streaming down Tristan's face. "They're gone. Why can't I have them back?" Tristan sobbed as Clint helped him up to his feet. "It should have been me. It should have been someone else. What kind of man can't save his own little girl?" Tristan asked as he looked pleadingly into Clint's eyes. "A good man," Clint said in a low voice. "For now, you rest up. We're going to need you sober if we want any chance at clipping that bastard." "I hate you." Tristan shivered as he suppressed his sobs. "You promised. You promised." Tristan muttered. Clint helped him back into the caravan, and soon he was struggling against a restless sleep. "I love you too, Uncle," Clint said, wiping a tear from his cheek. "He's getting worse," Artemis said as she sat cleaning her rifle. They had stopped for the night. "He's fine," Clint said tersely. "I don't think so, Clint," Ramza said in his rarely heard serious tone. "I seen fish who didn't drink that much. I've known Trist since I was a pup. Ravon does this to him. Trust me, he'll be fine by the time we reach Silver City." "What was all that business about a promise?" Artemis asked tentatively. "It's nothing for you to worry about. Let's focus on how we're going to get Silas." "He's pretty powerful. Has he been shattered?" Ramza asked. "No, he's a complete son of a bitch," Artemis said. "So that means that we'll have the opportunity to shatter the gem once we take him down. We're going to need that power to take down Raven and others like him," Clint said, pausing in thought for just a moment. "So, what's the plan, darling?" Artemis asked. "We could have Artie play bait," Ramza said, chuckling. "I'd follow that pretty face even if I knew it was a trap." Artemis spat, kicking up small puffs of dirt, and gave Ramza a flat glare. "Too dangerous," Clint said. "Silas has a certain reputation with girls." "Are you saying I can't handle myself?" Artemis asked indignantly. "'Cause as I recall, I've pulled your butt out of tighter holes than that. I may look like a lady, but I can take care of myself," she said, cocking a round into the chamber of her rifle to punctuate the point. "Trust me, Angel, we all know that leaving you alone with a mage is more dangerous than leaving him alone with a starving panther. Still, I'd like to avoid any direct contact with him. Call me Angel again, and you'll wish you were sitting next to a starving panther," she said, folding her rifle across her lap. Clint tipped his hat toward her in submission. After a minute, she seemed to be pacified by the gesture. "You want me to clip him from a rooftop?" she asked, pointing her gun suddenly into the trees and pulling the trigger. A loud crack echoed as Clint saw a jackrabbit yanked out of the air mid-hop. "I love rabbit," Ramza said as he hopped up, moving to retrieve the rabbit for whatever meal he had planned for them that evening. Clint nodded appreciatively at the difficult snapshot, but Artemis just winked at him and went back to cleaning the newly fired weapon. "What do we know about his powers?" Clint asked. "Direct control over wind. That's the one he likes to show off. He doesn't have any reflexive powers, far as the talisman can tell. He can create a windshield around him that can deflect bullets, but it takes him a second to do it. Nobody we know has seen his other power. So we gotta plug him before he can get his powers off the ground. Are there any other talisman groups nearby that can help us?" "Closest one is Hunting Ernest, and they're 300 clicks south of us," Ramza said, humming as he began skinning the rabbit. "Don't think they'll give him up to join us. Trig is heading up that group." Clintid nodded in agreement. "Do we know his vice?" Clint asked. "And more important, is it helpful?" "Nope," Ramza said. "So what do we know?" Clint asked, growing annoyed. "I know that you're getting in line behind Sir Drinks a lot for dinner if you keep giving me attitude," Ramza said as he produced several large potatoes from a basket. His stew pot was already warming over the fire. Clint eyed him suspiciously. "Which barrel did that water come from?" he asked, pointing at the stew pot. Ramza put his hands on his hips. "You think I'd use the bath water from Mr. Stinky in one of my stews?" he said, glaring at Clint. "You're definitely eating last tonight," he said as he began cutting large potato chunks into the pot. "Now, boys, let's stay on target here. We gonna let me go for the long shot?" Artemis asked eagerly. Clint stroked the stubble on his chin, thinking, "I don't like taking a long shot when we don't know his sub-power, but I think that we can box him in. He's more dangerous out in the open. Plus, he can use his power to just fly away if he feels threatened." "So, what's the plan then?" Artemis asked, annoyed. "I've got something brewing in the back of my mind," Clint said, smiling. "Ooh, I like it when he smiles like that," Ramza said, laughing. "All of our best stories start with that look he's got right now." He does look rather dashing like that, doesn't he?" Artemis said sarcastically. "Oh, sure he may have that handsome look, but Artie, I thought you went for a real man," Ramza said, pushing his lower lip out in his best hurt puppy dog look. "Oh, darling, he may be handsome, but you know that it takes a strong man to make me go weak in the knees," Artemis said, winking at Ramza. "Besides, if a man can't cook, then what good is he?" Ramza said, puffing his chest out in pride. "And seriously, Clint, no man would be caught dead in such a ridiculous hat." Clint's mouth dropped open as he pulled his Stetson off and clutched it protectively to his chest. "You best watch yourself, sir. Insulting a man's hat is akin to insulting his lady. Them's fightin' words for sure." Artemis just laughed as she moved to her tent, setting her rifle down inside. She could hear the two men bickering, but the words faded into the background as the smile faded from her lips. A cold chill washed through her, causing her to shiver. She pulled the flaps closed as she squeezed her eyes shut, breathing in and out slowly. She tried as hard as she could to never let the others see her like this, but she reached into her pack and pulled out a bottle, taking a healthy gulp. The alcohol burned her throat, filling her belly, with a warm, comforting feeling. She looked down to see the bottle gently shaking in her hands. Of all the cities in Chayton, why'd it have to be Silver City? She thought to herself. 5 years. Had it really been so long since? 2 long years before Clint had found her in Grinder's Switch, a town about 30 miles from Silver City. 2 years. That felt like 2 decades. But now she was okay. Clint wouldn't let anything like that happen to her again. Not again. She couldn't let them down, not after all they'd done for her. She took another gulp before replacing the bottle in her pack. She could feel the liquor eroding away some of her anxiety, but she had to clench her fists to get them to stop shaking. It's okay. I'm okay. They don't need to know. He's not even there anymore. He's dead. He can't hurt me. I'm okay. I'm okay. She repeated over and over, trying to convince herself of something she knew wasn't true. No, John said, standing up. No, son, we can't do this here. If you want something from me, then nobody can know I gave you a gun. And if you get caught, you say that it's a family gun. Belonged to your daddy, you understand? I understand. Achilles stepped into John Gallette's smith shop. The door tugged on a string that was attached to a bell to alert John when anyone came into the shop. The room smelled of gunpowder and whale oil. It was well lit with the new electric lights that all of the wealthier shops used, despite the sun coming in through the barred windows. John stepped into the room from the back of the shop and paused as he saw Achilles. He stroked his long, dark mustache and paused, not saying anything. John was a tall, thin man, and he was known for his smith skills. Not only did he make fine weapons, but he was known to be able to fix just about anything. I'm looking for a gun, Achilles said, clearing his throat and trying to sound much older than he felt with John's piercing eyes on him. John pulled over a stool and plopped down, leaning in, and set one elbow on the glass case that was filled with all different types of revolvers and rifles. He twirled the end of his mustache, a habit he'd developed over the years. Is that so? John finally said, leaning back and crossing his thick arms. Yes, sir, Achilles said as he began to look over the different types of pistols kept in the glass case. Your parents know where you are? John asked. Achilles paused for a moment, pushing down the lump in his throat. They're dead. Silas killed them. John paused for a few moments, twisting his mustache. And so, here you are, boy. What makes you think I'm going to sell you something that'll just end up coming back to bite me? Achilles flinched and steadied himself. He knew he'd have to convince John. Luckily, Achilles remembered his dad saying once that John had no love for the mages that terrorized Silver City. Way I see it, Achilles started trying to remember his practiced script. You got 2 daughters that are both real pretty. John stopped twisting his mustache and glared at Achilles, who swallowed nervously. The way Silas is letting the nobles run things, I figured a man in your position would want him gone right quick. What makes you think I ain't protected? John asked, eyeing him suspiciously. Achilles paused, thinking furiously. You mean today, right? He asked. John gave him a puzzled look. Achilles grew a little bolder. You mean that you're protected right now, but what about next week or next year? Everyone knows that mages are unpredictable at best. That magic breaks their brains. John eyed him again, but this time Achilles thought he saw a glint of worry in his eyes. He was worried, Achilles thought. You sell me a gun and I'll end him, Achilles said, biting off the words as he spoke them. John looked thoughtful for a moment, twisting his mustache before speaking. Who's to say that the next mage won't be just as bad, or worse? No one's saying he won't be, but you know that this one is bad. Sabra's ruled here a long time and he was pretty decent, Achilles said, shrugging. John's face got red and he stood up. Sabra's killed a lot of good people. Just 'cause they wasn't anyone you know, don't make it any less monstrous. I think it's time for you to leave. I don't run a charity for people who lost someone special to them. I can pay. Achilles broke in. You know how much money a revolver costs? John snorted. You remember Meg Palouse? She was my mum. Achilles said, blinking away unbidden tears. You remember the emerald necklace she used to wear? I know it's worth more than some of your guns. John paused, and Achilles saw the recognition in his eyes. I don't need anything fancy, just a good solid gun that shoots straight and a mess of bullets to practice with. You don't even know how to shoot? John asked incredulously. You don't need to be a trick shooter to kill a man. Achilles said a little more harshly than he'd meant to. I'll get in close and put one in his skull. Believe me, I can get him. John sat back down on his stool, obviously thinking through the situation. I might have something for you, but it's not worth half what your mum's necklace is, but it'll shoot straight. Achilles felt a tingle run up his spine, and a grin spread across his lips. I can bring it to you in an hour, he said excitedly. When do I get the gun? Achilles asked. 4 weeks, John said. Achilles felt like he'd been punched in the gut. 4 weeks, why the hell do I gotta wait so long? 2 reasons, John started. 1, you gotta look pissed off when you leave this shop. If you don't look like I kicked you out, then it'll raise suspicion. Silas has got someone keeping an eye on me. He logs every gun that comes through my shop. And the second reason? Achilles asked. 4 weeks is long enough that whoever saw you come in here will forget your face. By the time you get some killin' steel in your hands, I don't want anyone to remember you were ever here in my shop. Achilles frowned, but honestly, he was feeling relieved that John would sell him anything at all. He could wait a few weeks. You know the East Side graveyard? John asked. Achilles nodded. In 4 weeks, the gun will be buried under the palm tree at the southeast corner. You pull it out of the box and put the necklace in the box and bury it again. John paused for a second, thinking. When I retrieve the box, it better have the necklace or my gun in it. If it don't, then Silas is going to get a detailed description of you. You get me? Achilles nodded again. Now get out of my shop before I skin your hide, John yelled. Achilles blinked at the outburst, but understood when John gave him a slight nod. He painted a disappointed look across his face and dashed out of the shop, stopping to look back longingly as if his hopes had been dashed to pieces. His ankle throbbed in pain at the sudden movement, and he limped heavily all the way back to his hovel. When he got there, Chauncey was jumping around and screeching in excitement at Achilles' return. Hey boy, I'm glad to see you too, Achilles said as Chauncey ran up his leg, climbing onto his back, hanging off his shirt. Guess what, Chauncey? I got it, Achilles said in an excited tone. Chauncey jumped onto the table and began screeching excitedly and slapping his bottom. Achilles knew he didn't understand him, but he could tell that he was happy. Okay, I don't have it yet, but I'm going to get it. Now all we have to do is find out where he's going to be and get close enough to take him out, Achilles said as he made a gun with his hand and aimed it at Chauncey. The monkey put up his hands as if it was a real stick-up, and Achilles yelled, Bang! Chauncey fell over, pretending to be shot, and Achilles laughed. Sometimes he wondered just how much Chauncey understood. It always felt like he knew exactly what Achilles was saying. Don't worry, boy. Once I kill him, then things'll be different. We'll be heroes, and then I'm going to get you some real ice cream, just like the nobles eat, Achilles said as he sat down, rubbing his ankle. Chauncey stood back up and stuck his tongue out. Sorry, boy, Achilles said. I don't have it right now, but don't worry, I'm true to my word. Chauncey spun around and began bouncing around the room, looking for something to play with. The rest of the day passed slowly as Achilles rested his ankle, waiting for the cover of night to go and retrieve the necklace from where he'd buried it. Several hours after Chauncey had fallen asleep, Achilles began the trek out to the graves he'd dug for his parents. He couldn't afford to bury them in town or even buy a headstone. When he got to the place, he knelt in front of his parents. He sat for a long time, just staring at the graves. After a while, looked up at the stars and remembered his father pointing out the constellations. "You see that group over there?" Hector asked Achilles. "Yea, it looks like a serpent." "That's right, it's Draco, and you see that cluster across from it?" "Dad, I'm tired." Achilles whined. "I know, son, but the stars only come out at night. Now what does that clump over there look like?" "Like a line and a circle." Achilles said tersely, "That's good, but let your imagination go. Think of a warrior and look at them again." Achilles closed his eyes and sighed. He knew his father wouldn't give this up. He was obsessed with the stars. He opened his eyes and stared at the sky. Suddenly, the stars seemed to take on a life of their own, if only for a moment. "It kinda looks like a man holding a spear," Achilles said curiously. "That's right," his dad said excitedly. "And do you know what it's called?" "No," Achilles said, sighing. "His name is Achilles," his dad said, smiling. "That's my name," Achilles exclaimed, suddenly interested. That's right. Achilles was so fearless that when he died, Ceres was too afraid to take him. So instead, he went up into the heavens to battle the dragons of the stars. He was the only man brave enough to protect us from them. Achilles slumped, tears streaming down his face as the memory played in his mind. "You named me wrong, Dad," Achilles said, voice shaking. "I'm afraid. Without you, I'm afraid all the time." He sat there in the dirt and watched the moon walk across the sky as the hours ticked by before he rubbed the last few tears out of his eyes. He moved over to the side of the graves where he'd buried the necklace and started to dig through the earth. The dirt made its way underneath his fingernails as he pulled handful after handful away. Before long, he started to panic when he couldn't find the box he'd buried. "I didn't bury it that deep," he thought as the panic gripped him. He expanded the hole to the sides and then the top and bottom, tearing the flesh on his fingers as he ripped at the dirt. Sweat poured down his face as the dirt clung to his wet skin. His hands looked like they were caked in dirt. Exhausted, he sat back staring at the large hole. His hands throbbed and blobs of dirt clung to fresh cuts in his fingers. "It's gone. Someone took it," he said as he leaned over and retched up what little was left in his stomach.